Any normal person would die from a bullet through the chest, but the Punisher? Let's see what happens. Welcome to the Complete Story Series, where we take trade paperbacks and single issues and we break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then we read it dramatically back to you. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. Don't forget to support the industry that brings us these great books by buying the ones that you truly did enjoy, either online or going to your local comic book shop. These stories are contained in Punisher 7, 8, 9, and 10. When we last left the Punisher, he had just stopped the Dull Souls gang in LA, but the Howling Commandos were sent to bring him in. While he put up a good fight, he took a bullet to the chest as the bus carried him out of the city. He quickly patched himself up and he fled to southern Mexico, but it wouldn't be enough. He was gonna bleed out from this wound and he needed help. While he did find a shady doctor to patch him up, the doctor was a tad too shady because he drugged Frank into a coma and he sold him off. The Punisher was a hot ticket item. He was passed between a few individuals until eventually he found himself in Costa Rica at the mercy of El Diablito. The interesting part is that there's also a drone flying overhead, but we'll get to that later. He finds himself brought into a warehouse where El Diablito beats him with a bat, and while Frank was at this man's mercy, El Diablito couldn't kill him since he had already sold the rights to kill the Punisher. So after torturing him and beating him and just overall pissing off the Punisher, they throw him in a cell with another man. Frank's random cellmate pulls the bag off his head and he tells him that he's a medic for a random special forces group that was captured out here. Looking at his injuries, he tells him that they're not as bad as they look. They aren't too severe. So Frank tells him to rip the insole of his boot off and the medic finds a lockpick stashed away. Meanwhile, we see who is en route to pick up the Punisher for the buyer. Crossbones, one of the deadliest mercs in the Marvel Universe. Frank and the medic pick the lock and they begin their exfil, but the medic questions, "If you aren't a part of search and rescue, what are you doing here?" "I'm just a former Marine that they picked up by accident." Frank grabs the first guard not paying attention and he uses him as a body shield while picking off the other guards playing dominoes. He then tells the medic to grab some ammo and the medic notices something about this guard. Why is this guard wearing a Punisher costume? So Frank takes the gear off the guard and he puts it back on to the shocked medic's realization that this is the Punisher. Frank tells him that they'll discuss it later. "I saw a truck outside, that's our escape." The medic walks over and grabs a radio and mentions the drone overhead was his. Hopefully it's still there and it can help provide cover. So he radios up and they realize that they have support, and that's when Frank realizes they also have company. He tells the medic to get into the truck, he has this, and while the medic takes cover and coordinates the close air support, Crossbones is paying for Frank with a suitcase of money. Frank is beating the tar out of various guards so they won't follow, and then he jumps in the bed of the truck while the medic begins their escape. He opens fire on the open yard just as the Hellfire missiles come in. There's explosions and bullets everywhere, but Crossbones isn't a pushover like these thugs, and with throwing knives, he manages to injure the medic and disable the truck by lodging a knife into the engine block. They jump out of the truck and head into the forest to the last known location of the medic's partner, Greg. He's there, but he's very injured. The Punisher checks behind them and realizes they aren't out of the woods yet. Crossbones took out all of the survivors and he's moving through this jungle looking for them. So Frank tells the medic to get his friend out of here. He'll finish this, and he puts on the Punisher mask. The medic grabs his friend and he begins to make a hasty retreat, while behind him he can hear shots being fired all over. But he wasn't going to leave a teammate behind and he hurries back to assist Frank in the battle. They manage to cause enough of a distraction that both Frank and the medic can make a break for it, and they get back to Greg and they begin exfilling together again. First, they make it to the medic and Greg's old camp, and they find it overrun by El Diablito's men. It's not a problem for Frank though, as he shoots each one of them and he cuts their throats. With Crossbone and El Diablito's men following them and the camp temporarily clear, the medic calls up headquarters to tell them that they've escaped and they're making their way to the emergency exfil point. So Frank sets up a claymore, and they take position hoping to stall Crossbones long enough to make it out of this jungle. The explosion was perfectly timed and most of the men were either killed or injured, including Crossbones. But he's still moving. Frank and the Special Forces soldiers run out shooting any of the stragglers, and that's when the injured and really pissed off Crossbones throws a flashbang out distracting Frank, and he slaps Frank's rifle away. He picks up Frank and he pins him to a tree, where he shoves a knife into Frank's shoulder. At that moment, El Diablito and the remainder of his men walk up and they take a gun to Frank's head. "How much is he worth to you, Crossbones?" Frank is done playing around as he takes the knife out of his shoulder and he slices El Diablito's throat with it. Crossbones shakes his head. "Huh? I guess that works out." Then he grabs Frank. "Now it's time to go, Frank." But Frank stops Crossbones from pulling out another knife to kill the soldiers. "No, you came for me, Crossbones. You know what I've done and you know what I can do if I push myself. Do you think you can stop me without killing me? Let them go and I'll come quietly and you'll make your money." "They would be for sport. I don't care. You know the drill, Castle. Hood and cuffs and we'll go. The medic and Greg managed to escape out of the jungle entirely, thanks to Frank. The medic tried to take his rescuers back to find Frank, but Crossbones and Frank were long gone. The medic never forgot what Frank did for him, and will always consider Frank a part of his team. But Frank, well, as they flew over the ocean, and just as they were arriving at their next location, a ship floating out in the sea, Frank fought back and he fell into the ocean. Crossbones sees where Frank fell, and he tells his men to arm the ship with explosives like planned. That's their mission. Frank will be secondary. So Frank climbs back up on the ship just as they're setting the explosives, and sneakily, he knocks one of the men unconscious, taking his gun. He then makes his way across the ship, dropping as many men as he can, until he sees Black Widow fighting Crossbones? Both of them are surprised to see each other, but Frank informs her that they have 4 minutes. He couldn't stop Crossbones' men from rigging the explosives, and Black Widow tells him that she still needs her information. Have fun, I'm not here for whatever you're here for, Frank says, as he drags Crossbones to the nearby helicopter. And I still have some of Crossbones' men to find. She tells him that she'll be back in 3 minutes. She only needs 3 minutes. So Frank decides to turn back onto the ship just as Crossbones' men open fire on him. Missing, of course. I assume you were on a budget when you hired these guys, Crossbones. Black Widow makes her way across the ship until she finds the captain and she begins to beat him, trying to get her information until Frank shows up and stops her. It's time to go, Avenger. This man doesn't know the information. I've beaten plenty of men to know when someone doesn't know anything. So they drag the captain back to the aircraft and they load it up, getting ready to leave. Finally, Frank is free. And he even has this aircraft to help him get back to LA to pick up where he left off. The ship itself explodes as they're getting out of range. And that's when Frank realizes that he's not going back to LA yet. Because Black Widow just pulled a gun on him because she has a job for him. He's going to prison. I hope you guys enjoyed this story, and we will be bringing you the next part once it's actually released. Now, don't forget to check out the other videos on screen because you just might like them, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Comicstorian. I'll see you guys next time right here.